All right, now we're going to venture off and perform the second step of color correction, that is adjusting color or hue. So go to Working Files, Projects, and open up 1105 Adjusting Color. Once again, we're inside the color correction workspace, and we have 3 clips here. The first one is the Grand Canyon, and the tonality might be adjusted here a little bit, and the color is fine, but I want to show you how you can just enhance the color a little bit, so we're going to deal with that. Moving on down the line, we have this shot here, which looks absolutely awful. It's got this horrible green color cast, and the exposure has a limited dynamic range. Definitely no deep shadows, definitely no bright highlights. We need to fix the tonality first and then deal with the color cast there. And here we have this shot, which also seems to have a color cast, probably toward blue, I'm guessing. And we'll fix that as well. So let's go back to this first one. Now, whenever you do any kind of color work, you always start by doing tonality first. That is the workflow. So even here, we're going to fix tonality first and then move on to color. So we have this shot of the Grand Canyon. Let's add the Luma Curve to it. So go to Effects, double click on Luma Curve. There we are. Shows up here inside the Effect Controls panel. Now there really isn't much to do here, but it could be brought down a bit. It could be made just a little bit darker here in the black. So I'm going to pull them down just a touch here. Pull that to the right just to bring them down. Just to touch the 0 IRE line. Right around there is fine. And the top end looks like it's okay. So we don't need to mess with the highlights. But now I'm thinking it would be nice if we could have just a little bit more detail here in the low end of the midtones. But if we put a point here and drag it up, we're going to lift the midtones here, yes, but we're also lifting the highlights and making it kind of maybe too bright, kind of too washed out. So let me show you a way to deal with that. You don't have to put the point here in the middle when you want to lift things up to make them brighter. You can put them someplace else. So I'm going to drag this point out of the way and get rid of it like that. I want to first fix the contrast. I'm going to click here to put a point there and lift it up just a little bit, and put a point here and pull it down a little bit like that. Now that kind of adjusts the contrast, but you see it got even darker here in the middle. And we would normally go like this, click that and pull things up, which makes things brighter, but makes the highlights a little bit brighter too. So I'd rather just focus on the bottom end here. So I'm going to pull that guy away like this. I'm going to put a point here and another point after it. That's going to kind of lock down this end. It won't move now. And I want to put a point way down here at the bottom. Lift that up just a little bit. I'm lifting the low end of the midtones. And you can see that here inside the YC waveform. As I pull that up, you can see they kind of spread out a little bit, whereas the stuff on top is not moving, which is good. We're lifting just the low end of the midtones here without lifting the highlights too much. So you get just a little bit more detail there in the shadows. Okay, I like that. And so now, do we want to fix the color here? Well, the color is fine. But you know, it could be just a little bit warmer and a little bit richer, I think, just to kind of bring it up a bit. So let's add the fast color corrector to this clip. So it's active. And go to the Effects and double click on Fast Color Corrector and go back to the Effect Controls. I'm going to close Luma Curve now so you don't have to see it anymore. And here's the Fast Color Corrector. What I want to do is I want to make the scene just a little bit warmer. To make it warmer, we just want to pull it toward the orange a little bit. Let's just take a look at the vector scope and see what it looks like now. Go to the vector scope by clicking on the panel menu here and click vector scope. And there it is. And you can see it's just kind of pulled a little bit down here between cyan and blue. So it is kind of tending toward blue. It would be nice to make it just a little bit warmer by pulling it toward red or yellow like that. So I'm going to take this and pull it just a little bit that way to give it kind of a sunset look. See how that's working out? We're bringing it just a little bit toward the orange. You can see it sliding that way. I think it looks a little bit richer there, just a little warmer, kind of like sunset. Just up to you if you want to do that or not. And now I want to add just a little bit more saturation. The saturation level here is relatively small because it's kind of close to gray. We can spread it out a bit just to give it more saturation. So I'll pull it this way just to give it a richer color just a bit, maybe 140 or so, something like that. It's up to you as to whether you think that's too much, but let's just go through that clip and see how that looks. You know, that looks nice. I like the colors there. So I'm going to leave it just as we have it, left it like that. Now let's say you've got a whole ton of shots here of the same scene shot at the same time with the same camera, and you want to apply the same effect to all of those clips. Well, a cool way to do that is to add an adjustment layer above here by going over here, clicking on this, saying New Adjustment Layer like so, accepting the defaults there, and putting the adjustment layer on top of this, and then dragging out all the way across all the clips that you have, and then putting the effects on this one adjustment layer, and it'll affect all the clips equally. I'm going to go back to this clip just to show you how that works. I'm going to click on this, and control click on this, and right click and say copy. I'm going to put that on here, but before I do that, I'm going to go back to the effect controls for this guy and turn those guys off like that. Go up here and put it on the adjustment layer by right-clicking and saying paste. And those effects are now in the adjustment layer. They're off, but I'll turn them on now. Go in there. And I'll turn on Luma Curve. Oh, there we are. And now look at, we've applied that same effect to that clip by putting it on the adjustment layer. And it's easy to do that if you have a whole bunch of clips. That saves you the trouble of having those same effects repeated time after time over a whole bunch of clips. You can put it on one adjustment layer to take care of that. All right, let's move on down to the next clip, this kind of green thing here. Move into the middle of it a bit like that. Let's click on it to make it selected, so it'll show up in the Effect Controls panel. Let's add the tonality fixer to it first, which is Luma Curve. Double click on that to add it. Go back to Effect Controls, there it is. Let's look at the YC waveform then. Go back here to the YC waveform, and now you can see, wow, we need to bring the blacks down, lift the highlights up. So let's bring the blacks down first. That's always the first thing you do. Bring them on down to 0 or thereabouts. Yeah, right about there. And then lift the highlights by dragging this to the left, like so, and bring the highlights up to right around there. There we go. Now we got it. Now we can adjust the contrast if we want. So we click up here and lift it up a little bit. Click down here, drop it down a little bit. And if we want to adjust the overall brightness, we can fix that here in the middle. So now we need to fix the color though. So that's the next step. And to do that, we add the fast color corrector. So I'm going to close you down. Make sure it's still active though. Go back to Effects and double click on the fast color corrector. There it is. Now we're back in Effect Controls and here's our fast color corrector. And what I want to do is I want to take care of this green color cast. We can see how that's working by going to the vector scope. So go over here, open up vector scope, and you can see it's kind of pulled down here toward yellow, green, kind of between yellow and green over here, sort of. And we want to move it so we get this guy more toward the right. That's just a quick way to eyeball what's going on here using the vector scope. So we can just take the fast color corrector color wheel, click in the middle here, and just pull it to the right a little bit. Upper right-hand corner there. And now we've got it pretty much in the middle, which means things have been pretty much neutralized, which I think works pretty well. But there's a better way to do this if you have the opportunity to do it. If you know that something in the image is gray, then you can isolate that gray area and then move the color wheel such that you can see this thing turn to gray here. You want to have it centered, make it neutral, and make that area gray. If you make that area gray that's supposed to be gray, then everything else will come into line. All the rest of the colors will then be proper. So I'm going to undo this by clicking on this reset here. And I want to isolate this area of the path that I know is gray. It's close enough to a true gray to use this to set a color balance, because I know that if it's right in the middle there, then that'll be gray and everything else will be right. So I need to put crop on here to crop the area just down to that area, that path. So I'm going to go over here to Effects, double click on Crop, go back to Effect Controls, select Crop just to make it active. We got our points here. And bring Crop down just to isolate that part of that path right there. There we go. And now it's isolated, and you can see it showing up here, this little trace here. Obviously, it's not as much because it's not as much information, but the trace is obviously pulled this direction right there. We want to pull it this way to try to get it neutralized, so it's just gray. So let's go back to the fast color corrector and start pulling it in the opposite direction of this, toward the complement. We're taking this color out, and by doing that, we're basically neutralizing the fact that it's got that green color cast. We're pulling it that way. Notice how the vector scope is going in that direction. And right about there, I think we are now neutralizing it. Now it's gray. And notice there in the cropped area, we've got gray as it should be because we have neutralized it. Let me just kind of adjust it maybe like that. Good. Let's see if this worked. The way we see if it works, we just turn off the crop like that. Bam. There we go. And looks pretty good. I think we got the color balance right. The one little drawback when you've got a clip that's horribly improperly exposed is that you lose some saturation. So go back up and open Fast Color Corrector and scroll on down here. And there is the saturation. And let's lift the saturation. Let's expand this here to give it more saturation. So just drag this to the right a bit to the point where you think, okay, that's working. There you go. Maybe right around 150 or so to bring the saturation up to a reasonable level. Maybe that's a bit too much, whatever you think is right. But we haven't gone beyond any limits here. So that's a good fix. All right, let's move on to the last clip here. This is another instance where we can use a cropped area to help us out. This is an interesting little feature about our skin tone, whether we're Asian, black, white. All of our skin tone hues are the same. Isn't that wild? Even though we see people as black or white or some other kind of shade in between, all our skin tone's the same color. And that's because right under our skin, we've got the same color red blood cells flowing around there. And so we can isolate skin if that's possible, and then skin tone should be right along this line here. Now that line isn't put there to be used for skin tone, but it's referred to as the skin tone line. And the interesting thing about that line is that the complementary color over here is sky blue. So our skin has the complementary color of sky blue. Isn't that cool? So what I want to do is I want to make her skin go up along that line there. So I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I'm going to use the crop tool to do that. But the first order of business, of course, is to adjust tonality. So I click it to make it active. There we go. And let's go to Effects, add the Luma curve, double click that, go back to the effect controls. Let's take a look at how the YC waveform looks here. Go over there. There's the YC waveform. And it looks pretty good. We go from 0 down here to 100. So we've got a pretty good dynamic range there. We might want to adjust the contrast a little bit. So I'm going to add a couple points here. Add that one, lift it up a little bit. Add one down here, bring it down a little bit, and just kind of adjust the mid-tones here. Just make it a little bit brighter, perhaps, something like that. There you go. I think we've taken care of the tonality. So now it's off to step number 2, which is to isolate this region of her face here, which is a good place to get a skin tone that's properly colored. So I'm going to go get the crop, go to Effects, double-click on Crop. That adds the crop. Here we go. Click on it to put those points on there and drag it down to her face there, like that. I want to isolate her skin there on her cheek, like so. Now I'm going to go back to the vector scope and take a look at that. And you can see it's pulled right down there between cyan and blue. It's definitely a bluish cast there. We want to compensate for that. We don't want it to go to gray like we do with the path. We want to bring it up the skin tone line here. So the next order of business is to add the fast color corrector. So go to Effects and double click on fast color corrector. There we go. Let's go back to Effect Controls. And now we want to pull this guy toward the skin tone line. So here we go. We're bringing that up toward the skin tone line, kind of bring it that way. And we want to go past neutral. We want to bring it toward the skin tone line. I've pulled this all the way to the edge now, but if I want to even go farther, I can take this control here, which goes in bigger increments, pull it that way. But that might be too much. You can see how it's getting maybe a little bit too red there. So I'll pull it back just a little bit like that. So we've got just going the right direction. Looks like it's a little bit north of the skin tone line, so I'll pull it down this way just a little bit to kind of put it in the right place. There we go. And let's reveal how this works. I'm going to turn off crop, and that looks pretty good. We might want to bring up the saturation a bit, or we might want to add a little more color. So I can pull this way, maybe add a little bit more warmth like that. There you go. Back in the skin tone. If we want to fix the saturation, we can just a little bit, although I think it's pretty good the way it is. But there you go. That's how you can use the crop to isolate skin or an area of gray inside your clip to do the color correction. So these 2 steps, tonality and then color, take care of almost all color correction issues, be they problems or things that you just want to enhance in your clips. But you may want to go one step after that to secondary color correction, where you deal with an isolated area in a clip. And I'm going to show you a couple examples of that in the next lesson.